It's an online resource. Many of you probably are familiar with it, but it really tracks what's going on in the Virginia political world, as well as donations and campaign expenditures, and provides a level of clarity, of visibility into the political process in Virginia that I think exists in few other states. I'm active in an organization called the National Conference of State Legislatures. So I know legislators from the other 49 states and several of the U.S. territories. And they tell me they are familiar with VPAP, and it is the envy that many of them do not have a similar organizations in their communities. So David is a Florida native, a graduate of UNC Chapel Hill. He worked as a newspaper reporter, so you're in the Virginia Press Association, from 1983 to 1997. And his last assignment was in the political world as state capitol correspondent for the Roanoke Times, which was my hometown newspaper when I was growing up, and the Virginian Pilot. So without further ado, David Poole.
Thank you. I got my. Thank you. Thank you, Delegate Anderson, and it's a real honor to be here. If those of you that care about politics and social studies, you know most of the world doesn't, and so or they don't think about it all the time. So it's great to be in a room of people that do value social studies, politics, and have the incredible honor and incredible difficult task of conveying that to 8th graders or 11th graders or 12th graders. So, so I'm here, I'm going to talk a little bit. I have the disadvantage of coming after some really great pundits who have given you some terrific information about the election. But I'm going to give you our overview and kind of, I think, 6 or 7 slides, kind of give you some results. And that will give you a sense, if you're not familiar with VPAP, of what we try to do. We're a nonprofit group in that we basically take data from various state agencies, mainly the State Board of Elections, the Ethics Council, and we take that information and make it really easily accessible to the public. Most state agencies, their charge, if they're to gather information, they're really just trying to gather it and make sure it's on time and complete. And by the time they get around to thinking about, well, how do we make it easy for the public to look at this, they're out of time and out of budget. So there's a lot of wealth of data that's kind of siloed and kind of semi-hidden all over state government. And our mission is to gather that up and make it easy for people to see it. We're a nonpartisan group, and a lot of people call themselves nonpartisan, but we take it very, very seriously. We have a board that's equally divided among Republicans and Democrats, and we there's a lot of groups in other states that are in the money and politics space. They tend to be advocacy groups. They tend to be more progressive from the left. Their job is to drive money out of politics, tamp down money in politics. We don't take any position on whether there's too much politics, too much money in politics. We simply say Virginia is a disclosure state. A lot of states put caps and limits on campaign donations. Virginia has no limits. The idea is that if the public, if somebody takes too much from one group or one person, the public can see that and act accordingly and make that judgment for themselves. That was always a theory in Virginia. In practice, it didn't quite work that way, and that the information was kind of buried and tucked away in file cabinets that filled the whole wall of the State Board of Elections. So we've taken that information out of those file cabinets and put them online so people can make their own judgment. So I'm gonna walk you through this deck. But first of all, I really like having people stand up. So let's try this. I know it's the end of the day. If you're from Northern Virginia, I'm just trying to get to know my audience. Well, first of all, if you teach middle school, stand up. Okay. Hey, amen. All right. You can sit down. That's great. If you teach high school, stand up. Okay. All right. That's great. All right. Now, if you're from Northern Virginia, please stand up. Okay. That's great. If you're Hampton Roads, stand up. Or Northern Neck. Met a couple guys from Northern Neck at lunch. All right. That's great. We got a great balance here. How about the Richmond area, the greater Richmond area? Okay. All right. RPS, right? And then, is it the rest of Virginia? How about the Shenandoah Valley? Shenandoah Valley? Yay! Shenandoah Valley. And how about Roanoke West? Yeah, all right. And last but not least, Southside. Anybody here from Southside? All right. All right. Eastern Shore? Okay. All right. Great. Well, thanks. I'm gonna run through this deck, and we'll give you a sense of what we're trying to do in terms of data visualizations. We'll talk about our website, also what we're trying to do, and Delegate Anderson mentioned it. We're trying to also get these resources and configure them in a way that works for you guys in the classroom. And I know you have a very difficult job, and we'll go through that library as we get through. So I'm going to do the governor's race in 6 slides. Okay. First slide. This is the change in party performance between the 2016 governor's race and the 2017. And the colors are pretty evident. The darker the red is, the more Republican the locality shifted, and the more blue, the more Democratic it shifted. And you can look at this map in this way and say, well, that was pretty balanced, right? There was some places that went blue, and there was some places that went red. But I have a second map that you have to look closely at this map. This resizes every locality based on the number of registered voters. And so if you look pretty closely, Prince William goes into the northern, all the way through the northern neck and the eastern shore. And their color in the same color coding. So you can see that the change in party performance, how the huge shift in toward the Democrats in this election. There's areas, of course, that kind of up here in Covington, Allegheny, and Southwest that became redder, but you can see relative to the size of the areas that went blue, they're just really overwhelmed. And that's kind of the story of this election. The voter turnout. The voter turnout was actually up this year, up 11% over the previous year. It's the highest since 1997. A lot of interest in this race. But the turnout was uneven. Where was the turnout? And the next slide uses that same map. And then if it's the purple means the turnout was above average. More people came out than the 2013 election. And then the orange is much less interest. And you can see again where the intensity of interest was. Charlottesville, very, very Democratic, much higher turnout. Inside the Beltway, which is the very swamp that Donald Trump is trying to drain, just incredible turnout there. So this kind of tells you where the energy was in this election. You can see over here Chesterfield County, which is actually kind of down around Danville on a regular map. But Chesterfield County, which is a key Republican county, not much energy there. And as you may know, the Democrats carried Chesterfield County since the year I was born, 1961. It's been a while. So what if you combine these two? What if you were able to find the localities that both really amped up the people turning out and the partisan shifted one way or the other? Where are those localities? And this is a telling view. These are the areas that combine both high turnout and huge partisan shifts. And you can see the big localities, Fairfax, Northern Virginia, Loudoun, Prince William, all moving, turning out in huge numbers and moving to the left. And then there were areas that moved to the right, but they are kind of mere flecks on the map compared to relative size to the ones that went blue. And one last slide. We looked at precincts, not based on where they were, but their population density. So like if you think about a locality like Henrico County or Roanoke County, but more Henrico County, there's places in Henrico County that are urban, right? Would be considered urban, they're high densely populated. And there's areas a lot of areas in Chesterfield County that are suburban. And then there's some, if you go out in the eastern part of the state, that are rural. So we looked at all those and so picked them apart and put all the votes in 3 buckets. And we found that Ed Gillespie, half of his votes came from rural areas. And if you look at Ralph Northam, he put a balanced urban-suburban, that's where his votes came from. We're working on this analysis that basically, if you look at, we had the same graphic for the Republican primary in June. This is almost exactly what Corey Stewart's looked like. And this was almost exactly what Ed Gillespie's looked like in the Republican. It was just kind of switched in this election. Any questions, comments? All right, so I'm going to go through some free and easy. I kind of like that. I'm going to steal that from Meg. We have some free and easy stuff, and this is really a lot of the things on our site are designed that you can plug into an existing PowerPoint, update the information, not necessarily build a whole lesson plan around, but help explain a key point about voter participation, about interest groups, about how legislation works, how money in politics works. These are concepts that your students are struggling to understand. And we understand you need to meet the students where they are. This is not geared for, we're not trying to gear this just for your AP students or your advanced students. You know, you and I both know there's a lot of fannies in the seats, right? They're taking this stupid class because they have to, and you have to reach them. You have to reach them, and we want to help you do that. So, so these are some things from this election. If it's not too past, you can talk to them about. And this is what we call our voter turnout solar system, right? You think about, and maybe your students don't, but you think about a governor's race. You know, what is more important than the governor's race in Virginia, right? Well, if you look at last year's presidential and this year's governor's, there's probably like 1.2 million people stayed home, right? That is like, it's really, the governor's race is really kind of somewhere in the middle in turnout, in terms of turnout. It's a big fall off from the governor's race. It's a low turnout race. And trying to help students understand that elections are determined by who shows up, right? And if you're not showing up, then you're nobody, right? No one. You might as well not exist. And so, you know, if you want to talk to students about messaging, I'm sure a lot of them saw TV ads, right? And how to incorporate that. We have a whole section. It's vpap.org/offices/governor/media-buys. You can see where by market which candidate had the most. They were equally split in Hampton Roads and the Richmond markets, and but in Roanoke, you know, the Gillespie and his allies, you know, dominated the airways, and in Northern Virginia, Northam had a slight edge. Yes.
What are the different shades indicate?
There's 4 shades here. There's 2 reds. The darker of the colors is the candidate buys, and then the lighter shade would be like the NRA and other groups that are, you know, saying defeat Ralph Northam or elect Ed Gillespie.
And the interest rates really didn't have much in the Washington area?
There wasn't.
It's like all candidates.
Yeah, it's so expensive. It's such an expensive market in Northern Virginia that typically it's prohibitive for a lot of groups. That's where the Latino Victory Fund ad ran in Northern Virginia. It only ran a few times. That's all you needed.
Were they asked, do you know if they were asked to pull that based on controversy it created?
They pulled it after the mass shooting. One of the mass shootings. I lose track. The mass shooting in Texas. They did it, and then, but before, I think they, you know, it's all kind of happened together. The other thing we have this year is we have YouTube videos for all the ads. So I don't know if you know, you could show some of the messaging, and we show where they were shown in the state. Some messages were only shown in Roanoke. Some were only shown in Richmond. You know, what you saw really depends on where you live. And so that's vpap.org/updates, plural, updates/2759. And you can go and see, you know, what was the Enron ad that showed so often. So that could be a way to engage them with video, which, my son, if it's not moving, it's not happening. So this is, I call this the Andy Warhol. Goes back the 56 years of governor's races. And really, you can use this if you're in a region of the state that used to be, blue and went to red and now it's back to blue again. That might have some possibilities there. People might be interested in like why they lived in Arlington. Arlington now is so liberal. Why was it so Republican in the 70s, in the 60s? What is that all about? Again, you probably won't find out on SOL, but it's something to maybe find their interest. This is another map of the governor's election. This is abstracted. Every rectangle is relative to the number of votes, and it's divided into urban, suburban and small cities, and rural. And you might find if you're from Lancaster County, you might find little Lancaster County, and talk about are you kind of on the sidetrack of the state? Are you in Fairfax? You're like this huge important piece of the state. So help students understand kind of the idea that population is really destiny, really, right? Demographics. So kind of put yourself in perspective. And this is about money in politics, and it really looks at what are the groups that are the largest donors to the governor's race. And traditionally, Virginians, individuals, were the largest donors, and they are the yellow ones. The blue, which has gotten so big, are outside groups that come in here. These are partisan groups. These are labor organizations. These are single interest groups that treat our governor's race as a kind of proxy battle in a larger national ideological or political war. And they now outspend, or 2-to-1, their money is in the governor's race compared to Virginia. And so, Virginia has, I think deliberately, maybe it wasn't deliberately, but it happened over time that we had our elections in an off year. There's only two states that had the governor's race this year, us and New Jersey. So the idea was to kind of isolate ourselves and insulate ourselves from national politics. And that is no longer really possible in today's world. And then something that, in the House races, you may live in an area that had a lot of change in the House. And I don't know if the students are talking about that, but here's something to consider. Basically the question, who wants to run against an incumbent legislator? Basically it's kind of a kamikaze suicide mission. Incumbents, they have the name recognition, incumbents have the money, and incumbents have all these advantages working for them. And so we look back in time to see how often, usually to get somebody run against an incumbent, it takes a lot of recruitment and talking, a lot of arm twisting. You finally find one sucker who will do it, right? And so it's rare when you have more than one person of the party out of power vying for the chance to, go down in flames against an incumbent. In fact, so we looked at the last few cycles, and you can, if you're in the back row, you probably can't even see it. There's only 1 or 2 a year. I think one year there was 3 instances of more than one person wanting to take on an incumbent in a district. This year, there was 15. You had people standing in line to run. You had 3 and 4 people in some districts wanting to take on an incumbent. The energy that was behind the Democrats this year, I think was a factor. And, there's a lot of people, maybe including myself, who thought, well, that's naive. These people are naive. They're beginners. Just wait till they get into the campaign and, blah, blah, blah. And, I guess the thing about it is, it's kind of like in sports. You really can't win unless you think you can win, right? And these people really believe they could do it, and no one saw this coming. No one saw this coming. This might be an interesting discussion point. This is a graph that compares 4 demographic spots: age, gender, educational attainment, and race. And it compares if you can see this, there's a dark triangle, diamond, that has Virginia's population. And then the orange line is the current 100 members of the House of Delegates. So you can see they're they're older than the median age. They're far less female, and they're far more white than the rest of the state. And then we took a look at the 19 new delegates, at least the ones that, some of these races haven't really been completely firmed up. There'll be some contested races, how they compare. And it's a much different, other than educational attainment, it's a very different profile. 60% women, much younger, and much less likely to be Caucasian. A very diverse thing. And it's interesting too that, the census you're going to see this going forward with the census and trying to determine race. Race used to be seen like a very affixed thing. In fact, there was a horrible part of Virginia's history where if you had one drop of non-white blood, you could not be considered white. But now we've gotten to the point where people, it's really hard to determine. People are not wanting to be characterized by one race or the other. I'm a Latina with an Asian father. What does that make me? And so, there's a couple of members of this class that do have that kind of identification that's not clearly just A or B. And I think that's kind of where the world's heading. So those are some things on our website that you can use, hopefully just from this election to, if you know what to do with them. Separate part of our website called education.vpat.org. And this is a civics education library of images and some videos where, hopefully, and we held this last summer at the College of William and Mary. We brought 10 teachers, 5 middle school, 5 high school teachers from around the state, and really spent 2 days with them and learned a lot. Learned that our website is full of jargon, full of it assumes you know a lot more than you possibly should know. And it was kind of painful and embarrassing to look at our site through the eyes of these teachers who are trying to get these ideas across. So, we're a small organization. Allie Maslowski from my staff is here. Some of you might have met her out front, but there's Allie, me, and 3 others. So we don't have a big team, but we're really thinking about long term, how can we make this site have some terminology, some glossary terms, like what is an incumbent? That's a term. I think about, I came out of college, and I was educated, right? I had my little diploma, and I went to work as a newspaper reporter for the Lynchburg News and Daily Advance. Anybody here from Lynchburg? All right. So they sent me down to Campbell County. That was going to be my beat, right? I realized I didn't know anything. I had to cover the courts. I didn't know the difference between general district and circuit court. I didn't know how an indictment worked, really. All this stuff. I was like, I just remember thinking, this is a lot of fun, but why didn't they teach me this stuff? And and so maybe they did, and I just didn't sink in. But so I know that's the challenge in front of me. So we brought these teachers in, and after we kind of picked ourselves off the ground and said, okay, what can we do? They helped us pull together some lesson plans, which is a slightly different direction. I don't know how many of you, if you've been doing this for a while, you really need a full-fledged lesson plan. But we're gonna make those available on our site, and we're also just to let you know, this summer, probably in late June, kind of before, right after you're out of school, but before the summer gets really started, we're going to hold some one-day workshops around the state. and we'll pay you to come, and we'll pay you a per diem to come. And if anybody is interested in that, please email me or Allie on our website. Go to vpath.org, go to contact. Let me know if you're interested. We'll get you on the list. So we're really excited about this. We do know that we looked at we did a survey this year. Allie did the survey of all our users, and I don't know, it was like 40% or over 60, and it was like, oh my gosh. I mean, okay, no, 60 doesn't sound as old as it used to, but it's like, okay, where's the future in that, you know? So anyway, so we need to figure out what these young people are thinking and how to get them, engaged, because, I don't know how much longer some of us are going to be around. But all right, so I'll walk you through a few of these, and then I'll go to the site itself, and I'll be glad to answer any questions. So we do things like we looked at donations in Virginia for Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton last year, and she raised a ton more money because he was an unconventional candidate. He was kind of self-funded. He had his message got out through free media. He didn't need to raise the money in a traditional candidate. And I don't know if you can see these colors. This basically looks at, she raised a ton more, and basically 3/4 of it was from in Northern Virginia. Half of it was 40% of it was inside the Beltway. That kind of tells you what kind of, where her people were. Whereas if you look at Trump, now, and again, he didn't raise as much, but it's much more diverse, and you can actually, write Southwest Virginia in this band as opposed to having a little arrow for a tiny sliver, So, that is, again, something that can try to help understand not just how much, but where the money is coming from. This is a correlation we did of the 2015 election. It'll be interesting to see what the 17 looks like, where the bottom axis is the number of votes received. So the further you move this way, you got closer to that magical 50%. And if you move this way, you spent more money. And if anybody remembers the 2015 General Assembly elections, it was an election where not a single incumbent was defeated. Think about how different this election was, but not a single incumbent was defeated. But you can see there is a clear correlation between how much you spend and how many votes you get. Now, that does not mean that just because you spend the most in a race, you're going to win a race, right? It's kind of like relationships, Money can't buy love, right? But if you've got a little coin in your pocket, it doesn't hurt. So if you're a candidate, you need to raise money to get your message out. You have, to be a viable candidate. So anyway, there's definitely a correlation there. We looked at, here's a way to look at where General Assembly candidates get their money, and there's 3 different kind of candidates, and there's a distinct profile of where they get their money. Incumbents get a huge chunk of their money, 45% from business lobbyists that lobby the General Assembly and give donations. Whereas if you're a challenger, you've really got to have the political party behind you. If you don't get targeted and the party gets behind you, then it's very difficult. And then open seats are almost entirely a party affair. Sure, if I can figure out how to do it. Okay.
It kind of contradicts the one with the guy who had the scissors. Because Southside, Virginia Beach, Chesapeake, Norfolk is all trimming and raising of blue. So he spent very little money, but yet he got a big dividend.
I see your point. She probably raised 5 times, 10 times as much as he did in Tidewater. This is just a relative to his, how much of his money came. His money was more evenly distributed, and the kind of extremes of Virginia, the extreme areas of Virginia, were more important to him relative to his overall
So,
money.
What I was getting, it looks to me like, your coin's good, but not all money is good money because he raised about 3 times as much for Tidewater, but yet Tidewater is going Democrat.
He didn't raise it 3
Yeah.
times. She raised it, this is showing total.
This is just relative to his total.
And by the way, what were the totals? That's the next one. I think I would know. Ballpark.
Oh
3 to
man,
1?
maybe
Worse than
10 to 1.
Wow.
I can go look that. I mean, yeah. So this is kind of like of every dollar he raised, what 10 cents came from inside the Beltway, a quarter came from Northern Virginia, or every dollar she raised, 3 cents was from Tidewater. So that's. Okay. And there's, looks at campaign spending, where the candidates for the General Assembly spend their money over time in each cycle. Just kind of, if you want to, get into that, you can see yard signs are going way down. The web is working its way up. And, in terms of voter participation, this year, this looks at uncontested races that were contested by a major party and contested by a third party. And this was the most, since we've been around, of major party contests. And mainly, those are mainly Democrats running against Republicans. There was, relatively speaking, about half the Democrats or more were uncontested. The Republicans were for the large part, playing defense in this election. The Democrats were all on the offensive. Voter participation, this was a count of write-in ballots in presidential elections. And you can see that in 2016, it nearly tripled the number of people who just said, "Give me Mickey Mouse over these clowns." What's that? Well, Trump lost Virginia. This is the write-in ballot in the November election. But it just shows, and I don't know how many of these people didn't like Hillary Clinton and opted out, or how many didn't like, but there was clearly a lot of people, an historic number of people who felt the need to vote for somebody else other than the people presented.
That's just Virginia.
That's just Virginia. These are all Virginia numbers. Yes.
Random fact on the same idea of my board supervisor person, 10% write-in.
Really?
And ran unopposed.
Unopposed. That's high.
That's insane. I've never even, usually it's like 1 or 2 or 4 is embarrassing.
Does anybody know who the delegate who had the most write-in votes this time against them running unopposed? Mark Keem. I think it was 7 or 10%. It was very high. So I don't know.
Do you think that since Trump was not a political person, that kind of opened up the eyes for the non-political person who's been in politics all their life to say, hey, I'm gonna run this time because, hey, Trump did it, he got the presidency. So is that why we saw this spike this time of the challenge of the incumbent? I want to change. If they might not be a Republican,
Right.
but they saw that somebody else could go in and try and get.
Like somebody from unconventional. I think they were all completely from outside of politics and never been in politics. But I think it's fair to say they're almost all Democrat. Most of them were women, and they were all in response to Donald Trump. So I don't think they were inspired by Donald Trump to say, "Oh, I can do this too." Right. They were more inspired by, "There's Donald Trump. I need to do something."
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, that's what I'm saying, because people see it that you don't have to be raised in a political family or a political arena, major in politics, and then become a political leader.
Right.
If you're passionate about something, you can go out there and do it.
Right. So is it I mean, I see your question. Is it a reaction to, there's a lot of, the pundits talk about the political elites, there's people on the left and the right are just kind of sick of the political elites and the political class.
Right.
And let's
Let average person come in.
Right.
And put their foot in. See, that's the way I see it here. People now feel like they can put their foot in.
right.
And it's not out of reach.
Well, it's certainly, it certainly defied anybody's expectations about how many of these people could win. Right. Yes.
To segue what she said, I actually was surprised and very proud when my student says, it's like our politicians have turned into the House of Lords. Now we're turning, it's like we're changing to the House of Commons.
Okay. House of Cards next. And then we have a section on redistricting, and that's a concept that's, I know it's very hard to explain. You have to deal with population and apportionment, and then, you've already lost them, right? And then we've created this thing called Happy Valley, where there's, 18 greenhouses and 12, actually, I'm not sure of those percentages. Did we correct these? Anyway. All right, so there's different ways you could align these districts. You can pack the purple houses into such a way that there's one purple majority and there's 5 green majorities. All right, so 5-1. And you can crack them by which you can make sure they get none. It's all 6 green and no purple. And then there's a representative way where you can draw this so that the proportions are consistent with the number of houses. And so these are on our website. You can use these. We did a flow chart of this is the General Assembly in terms of lawmaking. There was 3, and you understand, and Rich or Jim could explain this to you, that there's a lot of things that get killed or don't appear to the floor, but when things get to the floor, there was 3,033 floor votes last year, and 2,219 of them, the votes were unanimous, right? So, and then there was only 814 were contested at all. How much opposition? 576, very little. And then there was 238 call a lot. And that's at least 1/3 of the total votes were on the side that didn't prevail. And then we looked at those and said, did the party opposition follow along party lines? Almost universally, yes. These were just party line votes, and no, only 20 of them. And then among the party line votes, how many were straight party line votes, and how many were near party line votes? And so this was, this is a big change in the legislature where, there used to be more votes, I think, along regional lines and so forth, and the partisan lens now has become the overall lens for things. That doesn't say there's situations where people from different sides work together and achieve things, but kind of when push comes to shove. We looked at the number of lobbyists each year, a rise in lobbyists. So those are some of the things, examples from our site, and I'll be glad. And this is anytime you do a live presentation, as Meg found out with the sound. So I can't show you a couple of. We do have a couple of videos, but I'll show you the site, and then I want to open it up for questions. So the site is divided into 5 areas. There's money and politics, voter participation, redistricting, lawmaking, and election results. And then along the side, there's various filters. It's kind of like shopping on Amazon. There's format, which are graphics, videos, and web pages. And then there's various topics that are a little bit more granular than the main categories. So we'll go, voter participation. Actually, I wanted to show you this. This is it takes a couple seconds to load. You know, in that solar system where you saw that the presidential turnout's like this, and then it gets smaller. So the question is, who stays home, right? Who are those million and a half people that aren't showing up? And so we looked at the 2012. This is the information we had before this. 2012 and 2013 elections, and we looked at precincts that fit certain characteristics. So basically, we had this thing called voter retention. So think of that: 62% of the people, and it's not all people. Some people stayed home, but the total number of votes, 62% of the in the governor's race represented 62% of the people, the number of people who voted in the presidential race voted in the governor's race the next year. So not quite 2/3 came out, and that's not uniform. So we looked at age, and we have some precincts that are around college campuses, and suggest the turnout at these college campuses, 18 to 25, is below. So they're underrepresented. Younger people typically were underrepresented between 12 and 13. Again, millennials the same way. Middle age, 41 to 60, are more, and then 61 and over are considerably more. So it shows you when there's a low turnout election, people tend to be older that vote. Now, yes?
So that means so for example, this age 600, that there's a drop of 26%?
There's only a drop. Right. There had been a 38% drop, and this was only a 26% drop. So compared to the state average, older people are overrepresented in a governor's race. Is that clear?
Second age demographic generally 26 to 40, or the 18 to 40?
That is a good question. Whether that's a typo or, I think that may be 26 to 40. I think that's a typo.
Your description says select precincts where voters age 40 and under.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Okay.
But I mean, I understand her question.
Right.
Yeah.
40 and under.
It would be 26.
Right. So then we looked at precincts that had people of high school or less. So again, they fell below. And then if you looked at those who have higher than a bachelor's degree, advanced degrees, again, much higher. So again, when you have a low turnout race, the voters tend to be older and more educated. And then let's look at income. Low income.
Like the absentee vote ballot, or is this just a walk-in?
These are walk-in. These are in-person votes. Good question. In-person. So low-income people underrepresented, high-income people overrepresented. So, and then at race, in terms of race, African American underrepresented, and Caucasian just slightly over. So that tells you that, and this doesn't look, what the next election in Virginia next year is the Senate race, U.S. Senate race, but in 2019 will be the entire General Assembly will be on the ballot. And again, this is the last election before the next redistricting. So it's going to be a huge battle to see who controls the lines. And those turnouts, and I don't know if I can go back in my PowerPoint. That's not my PowerPoint. That turnout is that's a turnout down here. So you're going to go from a 48% to basically a 30%. You're going to lose that many voters, and will the voters then just become again, older, whiter, and richer? And that's typically aids the Republican. Traditionally, will aid aid the Republican Party in going into that pivotal 2019 election. So I'll go back to the education page. So there's various things we have. Again, we have a couple of videos that you might show your class. The redistricting will have maps that show. I think this is a silent video. Well, I'm not going to show you that one. This might be something, again, if you're depending on where you are, what part of the state you're in. I don't know if I can zoom in quite the way I need to here without over zooming, but basically this shows the last 3 redistrictings, and basically what happens is as population increases up in Northern Virginia, that the districts have to shrink, and then as population relatively declines in downstate, they have to start giving up seats. And so in 1991, you had 2 seats that went from the Roanoke area up to Northern Virginia. You had a seat from the Shenandoah go to Northern Virginia, and you had a seat from Southside go to the Hampton Roads. And then the next year, 2011, again, these areas lost seats to Northern Virginia, and then again it happened in 2011. Northern Virginia, as population grows, and I don't know, we have maps on here that will show you what the population changes has been since the last census. And to look forward, as you look forward, the blue areas are the areas that have lost population, and the orange has gained. And that shows you kind of where the pressures are, and basically what areas of the state are going to lose political representation, and which areas of the state are going to gain representation. So, so these are some of the tools that we have. Anyway, I'll be glad to answer any questions you might have about them or comments. So I guess I'm asked, how many people here have used VPAP stuff in your classroom before? All right, well that's great. That means a lot of you, it's new to you. I hope you can find use for it.
This is great. This will definitely get useful.
Well, thanks.
And like your thing, like where you had the curve going about the predictive factors of age and all that. I mean, we taught them those little predictive things about who shows up, and that perfectly correlates with what we taught them.
Oh, great.
So it's
Great.
visual.
Great.
Yes.
Some feedback like she gave you, that this is kids' world.
Right.
So the visuals are great. Like you can, if just throwing that up there, and then like in the crazy maps that the other guy had, mine will want to know, well, where am I? Where's my county? And then you have it broken down by county is important. The one thing I would change about that one of the graphs you saw is that this gentleman's question about the money.
So that was too confusing?
I mean, it's important to know that there was a broad range of fundraising and that there was hardly any in this area, that area, but it'd be easy for someone to confuse and say, wow, Trump outraised Hillary Tyward, that's insane. Well, he didn't, and you had to explain it to us, but if you just put all total donations at the top, it's like with a little asterisk.
That might help.
Your video, your graphic still shows something that's worth showing without the total dollars, but considering the total dollars also would be something that the viewer should be aware of when they look at it. Does that make sense?
It does. It's hard to take these numbers and make them tell a story, and make it clear and simple. And so we stripped the numbers out to make it simple, but then we lost the clarity. So we got to find that right balance.
I assumed something that wasn't fact.
You'd have been teaching that fake news there. Yeah.
I like how you have all the donors and where they spend all their money. So I make my students look up Dominion Power and see where all their spending goes. I think it's
Okay, great, yeah. And yes,
I was just going to comment, I've been struck today, all the speakers have used demographic information, cartographic information, this terrific data that we can all access from. And the point Jim Dillard was making, you know, that social studies has been pushed back and STEM and yada yada, all those things we know. I mean, I see these kinds of things as a link for us, you know, where we take, you know, Dr. Kidd made the point first thing this morning when he said, you know, we're talking about data now. It's not as much about political philosophy. I mean, there's so many things here, and here, it seems to me, here's an entree for all of us to take those math skills, take those graphing skills, you know, all that stuff, and do some interesting things with kids. And there's so many ways you could do it. And then, in the larger sense, what that does for us is make social studies relevant again. You know, what a concept. So,
yes.
Has the voting participation for 18 to 40-year-olds increased over the last 30 years?
You know, there's studies that kind of look at that both ways. Even this particular that went up, I guess, in the Obama election, but then kind of came back down. This year, we had a presentation on Monday up at George Mason from the two campaign managers from the Northam and Gillespie campaigns kind of came together and have a civil conversation, and they both talked about the texting. You know, if you think about your kids or your students, the joke is when we have a summer intern, we kind of haze them by saying, I need you to pick up this. This is a 19th century communication device, and call this office and ask for something. And they just start sweating, because all they do is text. They don't know how to communicate by phone. And so, these groups got these they FOIA'd and got these student phone numbers, and they blew up the turnout in college campuses by texting them and having conversations with them. So I think in this election, that's going to be the youth vote kind of got out, and they spoke to the people where they were and got them engaged, I think, on both sides. That's always kind of been a challenge of how to, as young people are trying to become citizens, and they're still trying to figure out who they are, to think about their place in the bigger world is something that typically doesn't happen until later in adulthood, and then benchmarks like home ownership and so forth are being delayed, and that's but that's a whole course we could teach in that. But that's a really good question, and we're going to have that meter to look at this election. We'll see if that changed. I think the younger people did get out in this election.
Did they have bots doing that?
That was somebody asked if they had bots, and that's illegal to use a bot to do that. So they actually had to have.
My phone, I'm certain of it.
They what?
I got text messages. I wasn't sure. And I just went back and forth. I was trying to figure out.
And you think it was?
And later, and so I think the fact that I engaged then suddenly made my number Poole to whatever
Right.
campaign it was. And then when it was all over, I got a phone call, and that was definitely a robot, because the conversation did not like.
I mean, there was actually a robot having a conversation with you?
Yes.
Yes.
I haven't had that yet, no.
Yeah. And they kept calling me a woman's name too, Leah.
Really?
I'm Leah to somebody.
I got a text, my phone number used to be owned by somebody else, and I forget her name, Bernadette or something. Like, hey, Bernadette, the election's next Tuesday. And I would just say, this is not Bernadette. I guess, I don't know.
They're trying to get women's vote out.
But,
They did.
they did. Yes.
Guys, Princeton County, we have a hard time getting videos. We get blocked they block us out of everything. If I have problems downloading any of these videos, is there somewhere direct that I can contact you and
Yeah.
get to a thumb drive?
We'll help you out, yeah,
Okay.
if you
Yeah.
have a problem. And we can, or send it to your personal email, or, yeah.
Didn't
Yes.
you say botting was illegal? Is it
botting the text is, that's what they said. I'm not an expert. But they said you can't text by botting. So, all right. So, any last questions? And I think some of you signed up. Alice has a whole list of you that signed up. If you didn't hear about it, we have another service that we haven't talked about, and I'll just finish with this. It's called VA News, and we have somebody that gets up at dark 100, and they go through every online newspaper in Virginia, and they gather every story about politics and government, and it goes out every morning as an email at 7:15. It's free, and you can scan through it and go. There's a headline. I'll show you real quick. Today's VA News, and well, you can subscribe. Here he is, right here. So it's basically you go through. There's a headline, and you can tell what paper it is, and there's a summary. And so if you just want to scan past it, go, don't need to know that. I know that. And it's like, ooh, what's that? You can click through to the headline and go to the newspaper and read the story. So it's free. If you go to vpap.org and hit and subscribe, love to have you sign up.
Sorry, those resources you were showing them, what was the website for that? Or how do we get to it from your website?
If you go to vpap.org, there's a little newsboy right there. And if you want to subscribe to it, it's right up in the corner. It's not the subscribe button is not on the phone, but love to have you read that. I know Rich Anderson. He starts his day every day reading VA News.
And if it's late, I don't like it.
Thanks, Rich.
All right, thank you. Thank you.